Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I feel like I'm serving major Elvira, Queen of the Dead type of vibes right now, and I'm like kind of living for it a little bit. Obviously, I'll address the elephant in the room. I finally got my hair cut after like 7 months of COVID doing absolute horrible things to it. It is finally cut, and I got bangs. Yes, I'm emotionally fine. I know that like most women don't cut their bangs unless they're going through like extreme distress, but I love the look. I'm really happy with how it turned out, so yay. You can't really tell on camera, but it is like red, like a dark red. So I'm feeling very vampy. I wore a dress that has like vampy sleeves for this video, so very excited to be feeling spooky inside and out. Are you wanting to come in? You like to be present when I make videos? You're gonna have to be quiet, okay? Go lay down. Good girl. Lay down. Want your bone? Okay, where were we? Before we get into today's video, if you have not watched last week's video, which was part 1 of our Freaky Fall series, definitely go check that out. The link is in the description box below, and it will be in the iCard in this corner right now, so definitely go watch that. We talked about skinwalkers and Skinwalker Ranch and this old ancient Navajo legend, and it was really interesting for me to research. This week we're going to take a turn towards something that was historically true and proven, but we're going to add a little bit of a paranormal element into that today. And that story is of a serial killer turned ghost haunting people still, maybe. We'll see. So if that interests you at all, if you like videos about true crime or the paranormal or anything creepy crawly or freaky, then definitely please hit like and subscribe to this channel. I post every single week when I'm able, so definitely hit the notification bell so that you get notified every single time I post a new video. Now with all that aside, we can get right into this video, which is going to be about the serial killer H.H. Holmes. Now, Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes as I will refer to him in this video. He was an American serial killer in the 1800s who confessed to 27 murders, though I think he was only convicted of 9 of those because the other ones couldn't be proven, and a few of the people that he confessed to killing were still alive, so a little bit of a liar. But Holmes was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire in the United States in 1861, so going back in time, way back in time. Both of his parents were actually descended from the very first English immigrants in that area. He had 4 siblings, Ellen, Arthur, Henry, and Mary, and he was born smack dab in the middle of all of them, so a true middle child. His dad was a farmer, and his parents were devout Methodists. They were very, very Christian. So there are some conflicting accounts about his childhood. Some people speculate that he suffered a lot of abuse from his father and that it was a very strict and abusive home. People speculate that much like other serial killers, he tortured and killed small animals. However, there's never been any evidence or eyewitness accounts of any of this happening, and so many people believe that he had a completely normal upbringing with completely normal parents in a very rural, normal area. When he was 16 years old, he graduated from school and took some teaching jobs at the age of 16, which is just crazy. It just goes to show what a different time this really was. And on July 4th of 1978, he was married to his wife, Clara. They got busy right away and they had a son the following February, and his name was Robert. So 2 years later, when he was 18 years old, he applied to the University of Vermont, and he stayed there for a year and was dissatisfied with the quality of the education, so he decided to go in a different direction in life, and he actually attended the University of Michigan's Department of Surgery. During his time in medical school, he learned under and interned under some of the most prolific anatomy teachers and teachers who taught dissection. It was something that he was very passionate about, was about the human anatomy and specifically dissecting humans. During this time, the people that lived with him and his family said that he was extremely violent towards Clara. He would beat her and was very emotionally abusive to her, and so she fled with their son and never spoke to or heard from him again, which is probably for the best for her. I'm happy that she made it out of there alive. Shortly after this, Holmes was actually seen with a little boy who had disappeared, and people were claiming that he was walking around with this little boy, and that boy, after they saw him with Holmes, was never seen again. Holmes vehemently denied this and decided to move and get a fresh start. Now, all throughout this time of him being in the dissection labs with cadavers, and then he worked at a hospital shortly after that, he was actually up to a little bit of trickery. The entire time that he was working there, he was using dead people, cadavers, and filing insurance claims in their names and collecting the money. So basically defrauding these insurance companies. And after the whole run-in with the missing boy, he was like, crap, these people are going to catch on to all the illegal things I've been doing. So he changed his name to Henry Holmes, which is how we know him now as H.H. Holmes, and he moved to Chicago. After he moved to Chicago, he decided to marry a woman named Myrta, and he actually got married to her while he was still married to Clara legally. So he filed for divorce and sued her for infidelity, but it never actually went anywhere, and Clara didn't even know that he had filed this lawsuit. But regardless, he settled down with Myrta and they had a daughter named Lucy. Interestingly though, later his divorce from Clara was actually dismissed because they never actually showed up to do all the paperwork and stuff. So he was married to both Myrta and Clara at the same time. And not only did he have 2 wives, he actually took a 3rd wife while still married to both of the other women. Her name was Georgina York, and he married her only a few years after his daughter Lucy was born. So man was making the rounds, you know what I mean? So when Holmes moved to Chicago, he kind of abandoned the hospital doctor thing and decided to just work at this drugstore that was on this little corner store in the town that he lived in. He was a super hardworking employee, and eventually he worked his way up and actually bought the store. There's an old legend that Holmes killed the owner of the store and her husband in order to take possession of it, but that's actually not true. And in fact, the owner of the store's husband actually went to the University of Michigan, and he was only a few years older than Holmes, so they were kind of colleagues in a way. So he now owned this drugstore, and with all this new income, he decided to buy out the lot across the street and build a 2-story building. He actually was still doing his thing, defrauding people, and never paid the construction workers who built the place. So the first floor was supposed to be a bunch of retail stores, and then the second floor was apartments. Then he convinced investors he needed to build a 3rd floor and that it was going to be a hotel. But the whole project was never fully completed. In his 3-story building, he built soundproof rooms, secret hallways. There were hallways that seemed to go nowhere. It was basically just a giant maze of a building was how he designed it. Many of the rooms in the building had these chutes that would go directly to the basement, where he had these huge vats of acid and a crematorium. It was very much like a legit haunted mansion. It was called the Murder Castle for one, so you pretty much get the visual of what this place was like. Throughout the whole building process, his investors were constantly kind of on the fence and threatening to pull out, but eventually he had his ideal murder castle. He had a place where he was going to carry out some of the most nefarious acts I have ever heard of. Many people moved into the apartments, and so began his reign of terror. One of his first victims was Julia Smythe, who was actually his mistress. Now, her husband actually worked in the drugstore, and when he found out about Holmes and his wife having an affair, he packed up all his stuff and left. He left Julia with their daughter Pearl and just took off, and they actually both went missing on Christmas Eve of 1891. Now, Holmes actually claimed that she died during a botched abortion, and the truth of what happened to Julia and Pearl has never actually been found. But even if Julia died in a botched abortion and that is true, where's Pearl? So in 1893, an actress named Minnie Williams moved into the Chicago area. Now, it's debated how they actually met each other, but Holmes offered her a job as a stenographer, and she accepted the position. And Holmes was very charming. He knew how to convince people. I mean, he had 3 wives at the same time, so you can pretty much see how he was able to sweet talk people. And he actually talked Minnie into handing over all of her possessions, like her deed to her house in Fort Worth. So a couple months later, Holmes and Minnie Minnie were posing as a married couple, and he helped her get an apartment. Not long after that, Minnie's sister actually came to see her at her apartment, and shortly after that visit, they were never seen again. Now, because of Holmes' connections in the medical community, he was actually selling the skeletons of his victims to many other schools and passing it off as something normal, which I can't even begin to imagine that just being a thing. The whole idea of people's bodies being sold, like, it just is so weird. I mean, I guess it has to happen for, like, medical advances and stuff, but the idea that you could just sell someone's skeleton is insane. And by doing this, by stripping them down to bones, he was able to effectively get rid of any lingering evidence, and so it was very hard to pin all these missing people back on Holmes. So as I've said, Holmes was notorious for filing insurance claims in the names of cadavers, for taking money from investors and never actually following through. And at one point, he committed arson to try and cash in on some insurance money. Now, the insurance companies were catching up to him and trying to press charges against him for arson. So Holmes was like, bye, peace out, dude. And he actually left Chicago and headed to his property that Minnie had given him in Fort Worth. When he got there, he decided that he wanted to erect another murder castle, a bigger and better murder castle than the one that he had in Chicago. So all this time, he was killing people, he was doing all this insurance fraud, and he had never actually been arrested. That is until July of 1894, when he was arrested in St. Louis, Missouri. So he was actually charged with selling mortgaged goods, which is like where you take things from a private property and you sell them without permission. So it's just funny to me that he got caught for something so like minuscule. Meanwhile, they have no idea that he had actually already killed so many people. While he was in jail, before he got bailed out, he actually met a fellow inmate. Marion Hedgepeth was serving a 25-year sentence, and Holmes decided that he wanted to let Marion in on a sweet little deal. So, in line with all of his other insurance scams, Holmes decided that he was going to take out a plan and cash it in by faking his own death. Now, this policy would be the equivalent of just under $300,000, and he vowed to give Hedgepeth some of that money if he told him of a lawyer that he could trust in St. Louis. Hedgepeth came through, and he directed him to a lawyer who actually found the plan to be quote-unquote brilliant, which is just like, dude, you're a lawyer. Holmes is a doctor, and this guy's a lawyer. Like, these are the people that are committing these crimes. Like, everything was going smoothly, and then the insurance company had a sneaking suspicion that this was fraud, and they denied his insurance claim. So he didn't get away with it. So Holmes decided that if he couldn't fake his own death, he would just have one of his friends fake their own death. His best friend Peitzel, he recruited to fake his own death, and he agreed that they could split the money 3 ways between him and his wife, the lawyer from St. Louis, and himself. So this was their ingenious scheme. They would all go to Philadelphia, and Peitzer would basically take on an alias. Now, his alias would be named B.F. Perry, and he would be a scientist. He would file all of this information that he was an inventor in the area, and then he would mysteriously die in a laboratory explosion. Now, Holmes was charged with the job of finding a cadaver that could kind of be mistaken for Peitzer, but I guess that just seemed like too much work for him, because instead, he just killed Peitzer. So he actually knocked him out with chloroform and then set him on fire. So Holmes collected the insurance money, and he kind of staged a scene to make it look like a suicide, which it's like, who would kill themselves by lighting themselves on fire and chloroforming themselves? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So Holmes collected the money and then somehow sweet-talked Peitzer's wife into giving her the custody of 3 of her children. I don't know if she just had the wool completely pulled over her eyes, but it is insane to me that this woman handed over 3 of her kids to this man who just cashed in insurance on her dead husband. So eventually they travel away from the whole scene. He takes these 3 kids away from their mother, and he goes home to his wife, who doesn't even know about any of this. He takes 2 of the girls and puts them in a truck, drills a hole in the truck and puts a hose through it that is attached to a gas line and actually suffocates the girls. He then stripped them nude and buried them at his rental house in Toronto. Now, this home where he buried these girls actually no longer exists, and it hasn't for a very long time. They actually realigned a lot of the street there, so this isn't a place you can go visit, probably for the better. Now, obviously, these kids were gone for a long time, and so the police were called to investigate these missing 3 children. Detectives followed the trail back to that home and found the 2 girls buried there. In the meantime, Holmes took the 3rd child, Howard, with him. They traveled all the way to Indianapolis. Eyewitnesses saw him go to a pharmacy where he purchased the drugs that he ended up killing Howard with, and the knife shop where he had his knives sharpened so that he could use them to dismember Howard. He then burned Howard, and this is extremely grotesque, but parts of him were found in the chimney. So interestingly, Holmes was actually only stopped when he was caught by the Pinkertons, which were like a detective agency way back when. They actually were like personal bodyguards during the Civil War to Abraham Lincoln. So a little fun factoid there. He actually had a warrant out for his arrest for horse theft, so it wasn't just murder, you know, he pretty much did anything to con, swindle, and steal from anyone. When they came to get Holmes, they realized that he was pretty much ready to flee the country with his 3rd wife and was like all packed up and ready to go, so the officials were extremely suspicious of this. Now, while obviously a lot of like the modern stories are basically fiction about the murder house, murder castle, the castle, whatever you want to call it. At this point, after finding the 2 girls' bodies, they decided they wanted to raid the castle, and while they found a lot of weird stuff, you know, they didn't find all of the things that we talk about now, like torture devices and like medieval type of stuff. There were creepy things, and, you know, he obviously had killed people in the house, but it wasn't this like medieval dungeon like people have made it out to be. So the authorities built up enough evidence to charge him with the murder of his friend Peitzel, and they were able to convict him of that. And at this point, they had already had enough evidence of his murder of the 2 daughters of Peitzel. And in the meantime, he just opened his mouth and didn't shut up. He just started confessing like crazy. He actually confessed to the murders of 27 different people, but only 9 of those people have actually been confirmed. Some of them were like still alive whenever he confessed, so he's kind of one of those serial confessors. He also confessed to 6 attempted murders, and this was like such big news at the time because he had like people thought that the castle was weird and everybody wanted to hear, you know, the real tea about what happened. So newspapers actually paid him like a lot of money, like a little over $200,000 basically, to give them the deets. And it was all just a load of BS, like none of it was actually true. Holmes basically would say anything to anybody if they wanted to hear it. He said that he had a great life, and then the next day he would say that he was possessed by Satan, and then he would say, I'm completely innocent, and then he'd say, actually, I've killed 27 people and tried to kill 6 more, but I could have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids, type of deal. And one interesting thing about Holmes is that through all this, he killed people, he poisoned people, he lit people on fire, he dismembered people. He was known for dissection, and yet he was terrified of being dissected. So he requested that his coffin be completely wrapped in concrete, like cemented, and then buried 10 feet underground because he was terrified that grave robbers would try to dig him up and dissect him. Like, he was petrified of dissection. Yet he did that to other people, so that really tells you, like, he was such like a narcissist, a sociopath, did not care about anybody else except for himself. Now, after all of this, he was actually sentenced to be executed and hung, and he actually didn't die right away. It was like, he basically strangled to death. So there's that. Not long after this, the caretaker of the murder castle actually committed suicide, saying that he couldn't sleep and that he was being haunted. This is where the paranormal side of things kind of comes into play. The building was mysteriously gutted, like lit on fire by a mysterious arsonist that has never been caught. In August of 1895, 2 men were seen going into the building, and 30 minutes later were seen exiting, and the building went up in flames. Now, the bones of the building actually survived the fire, and it was in use until 1938. Now, this site that was used for the brutal murder of so many people is actually a USPS. Life is weird, man. The world is weird. Now, earlier in this video, I mentioned a home that he rented in Irvington, which was where he killed the 9-year-old boy Howard. Now, the owners of this home say that this house is extremely haunted. Now, obviously, anywhere where something dark and horrible and devastating happens, you know, you can't quite get it out of your head that a 9-year-old boy died in this house, and it was brutal. And the owner really feels like there is a dark presence that is trying to take over the house, trying to possess her. So they actually called in paranormal investigators, and you can watch like the Ghost Adventures, Zach Bagans, all of them. I know I have already mentioned them once in this series, but I love the show. But the owner of the home invited them to come in and conduct their own paranormal investigation. Now, some of it's probably like total BS, but there were a few moments where they definitely seemed like they were feeling some kind of dark entity in the house. I don't really know how I feel about ghosts. I don't really know if it's like just, you know, something that we can't understand or see in our finite minds. I don't know, do we live in a simulation? Who can know? But that episode is really interesting. I definitely encourage you to watch it if you are into hauntings or the paranormal at all. It is a very compelling episode. But with, you know, all of the deception, you know, his evil wasn't even just, I mean, not just, his evil wasn't just this part of him killing people. He was a liar. He was a sociopath. He knew how to sweet talk people into giving him whatever he wanted. And whenever he was arrested, they said that his face literally morphed and it looked like a demon whenever he was arrested, the cops that arrested him said. So, you know, was there some kind of evil that had taken hold of him? Was he just an evil guy? And, you know, that echo of how evil he was, the terrible things that he did to people, kind of echoing, you know, in the world around us now? Or is it just like in her head because she's living in a house where someone was murdered? That also could be it. But I think it's really interesting. Let me know what you think below. Are you like a paranormal believer? What do you think about, you know, negative energy? Do you think that when something really bad happens, is it like an echo? Or is it like, you know, a portal or something like that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it below, especially if you've watched the episode. But that's actually all that I have for this one today. It's a really very disturbing case. Unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of details because obviously this was like the 1800s, so they didn't have like the DNA evidence and blood spatter evidence and stuff like we have today. But just the fact that, you know, he killed at least 9 people, which is a lot, and tried to kill an additional 6 more. And just the sadistic nature, and like, it's so creepy to think about, like, all of his interest in like dissection and stuff, and how it was just leading up to like him doing these horrible things, and he just seems like the classic sociopath, and I am so freaked out by sociopaths. So definitely let me know your thoughts below, and I will be having a bonus video coming out this week because it is Freaky Fall. So I'm going to be kind of doing some ASMR videos later in the week every week, so you can be looking out for those. They're typically going to be posted on like a Friday or Saturday, so you have a little weekend, something to watch. Kind of like reading you a bedtime story, but really scary. So if you like ASMR or calming videos and you like creepy content or, you know, scary stories to tell in the dark, definitely be looking out for that. So turn on post notifications so you don't miss it. Let me know what else you want me to cover this Freaky Fall. If there's any specific haunting or paranormal activity or a cryptid that you're really interested in, like Bigfoot or UFOs, I am more than happy to cover anything that you guys want to see. As always, I hope you guys are having a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!